Welcome to Plain Civics. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Ulery.
And I'm Bobbi Fisher.
Our goal is to break down how government works so you can make the government work for you. Now, coming up, we'll talk about what may be the biggest challenge facing democratic institutions today. But first, we start with the latest installment of Ben Franklin's Virtues.
In our new continuing short series, we present the civic virtues that Benjamin Franklin, one of our most significant founders, thought to be the most important. He thought these civic virtues are qualities that help individuals become better people and contribute to a stronger society mattered just as much as public action. As we work our way through these, think about how these civic virtues track in your own life. The fourth civic virtue is resolution. His quote is, "Resolve to perform what you ought, perform without fail what you resolve." End of his quote. What promises and or goals have you followed through on? When you have a responsibility, promise, or goal, you should always follow through with it.
Before we jump into the episode, Bobbi, I have to tell you, and I know we've talked offline, this episode that we are doing on tyranny, I think it's my favorite episode so far. And the way that it's sort of like a foot in a sock or a hand in a glove of what's going on right now.
Right.
Is great. Let's dive back into this episode.
And now our feature presentation.
If you haven't listened to part one, the title was The Biggest Challenge to Democratic Institutions on Tyranny. One thing the framers taught us is to look at history to understand the roots of tyranny and to consider proper responses to it. We should take advantage of the knowledge this history provides and use it to adapt to the circumstances we are encountering today. We started the discussion in the last episode to get our listeners to think about whether they prefer that the United States remain a democratic republic / liberal democracy, or if they prefer the sound of what it would be like living with an autocratic government. As a guide for this discussion, I am using a small book by Professor Timothy Snyder, titled On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, which was published in 2017 and adapted to the circumstances that we face today. That is, I've adapted it to these circumstances. We covered the first 7 lessons in the book from the book in the last episode, and we'll finish up with the final 13 lessons today. So lesson number 8 is stand out. It's easy to follow, and it can feel strange to do or say something different due to perceived peer pressure. But without that occasional unease, there is no freedom. When you set an example, the status quo is broken and others will follow. Think of people from our own history, like Rosa Parks, for example, who defied the South's Jim Crow laws in 1955 by refusing to move to the back and give up her bus seat to a white person. Her courageous act led to the Montgomery bus boycott and helped lead to eventual changes in discriminatory laws in the South. A similar thing happened during World War II after Winston Churchill became British Prime Minister. Instead of conceding to Hitler in advance, as his predecessor Neville Chamberlain and other countries in Europe had done, he didn't give in to Hitler. This forced the Germans to change their plans and have to fight on 2 fronts in Europe. So now they have to both fight in the Soviet Union and in Western Europe. Shortly after this decision by Churchill, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and brought the United States into the war. Churchill's refusal to give in to Hitler's demands changed the course of World War II.
And when you talk about standing out, it brings to mind some of the ways we do that today is not necessarily on a bus like Rosa Parks, but in our spaces that we're in.
Right.
Facebook, for example, is one place. It's now, I feel it's never going to be popular with everyone in the moment that you do stand out. You're going to have people that try to tear you down. And trust me, this just happened to me last week. And
Mhm.
especially when you're standing up for somebody that's being a light and speaking truth, there's all this noise sometimes.
Right.
So, but I should say, don't let that let you shy away from standing out in the moment.
Right.
Because when we look back on this moment, I don't know how many years it's going to take us to get there, but we will be proud of what we did and standing out in that moment.
Now is not the time to be afraid to speak. It's just not. Peer pressure or not, like you said, if you're feeling it, you got to say it. And chances are, it may open it up for other people to not be afraid to say something. It's important.
And I feel if you're going to say something so crazy, defend it, right?
Right.
And let's have a conversation. But don't just come at people. You have to be able, you can't just mock lines that you've heard on the news and be this minor bird. You have to be able to defend it and make it make sense. So stand out.
All right. Lesson number 9 is be kind to our language. Avoid using phrases that everyone else is using and think of a different way of saying things. Read books and lessen your use of the internet. It has been noted by literary scholar Victor Klemperer that Hitler's language usage rejected legitimate opposition. For example, if Hitler said, quote, the people, end quote, he meant some people and not others. The current U.S. president uses the term the same way. Hitler referred to encounters as, quote, struggles in the way that the current president refers to, quote, winning. For Hitler, any attempt to understand the world in a different way was, quote, defamation of the leader, end quote. With the current president, it is, quote, libel or, quote, fake news. The effort to define the shape and significance of events requires words and concepts that escape us when we are constantly entranced by visual stimuli, such as televised news or social media. We have slowly fallen into a trance.
Yes.
20th century classic novels of totalitarianism warned of the domination of screens, suppression of books, narrowing of vocabularies, and the associated difficulties of thought. These novels include Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 and George Orwell's 1984. Limiting language acquisition and thought development is key to authoritarians gaining power. You can't develop language and thought by simply repeating the talking points you hear on television or podcasts or videos on social media or whatever. Individuals need to read one of the many thoughtful novels about tyranny and resistance, of which there are many, or historical and political texts. And I might just add there, if you're not sure, other than the couple of ones I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, Google it. Google what's a novel about resistance or tyranny. I mean, it's that easy these days to find some of these sources that you should probably pay attention to.
And if they're not banned yet by the library.
Exactly. Christians might return to their foundational text, the Bible, for lessons such as the one Jesus preached that says, quote, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, end quote. And the concern with what is true and false, also from the Bible, quote, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, end quote.
And I don't know how we ended up in this universe where the truth is not always the truth. It's disturbing to me. And what's also disturbing to me is that people put all their eggs in one basket for trust or information. I have made it a point not to do that. You have to have a handful of different organizations to provide your news or information. And then from that, you can form how you feel. Don't just let somebody tell you how you should feel. I
think some of that comes from what we've talked about before. Like, for example, the continuing, especially in, since 2016, the quote unquote fake news. And you just keep pounding that into people's heads, and that's that repetition.
Yep.
That's one of those characteristics of Hitler and an authoritarianism and keep saying it often enough and people are going to believe it. So now they think they can't trust any of the mainstream news, which is more likely to be the more legitimate of the news sources because they generally have true journalists doing the news as opposed to just talking heads on cable so-called news shows.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how the only news that's not fake to some people is the news that he or she watches, right? those are the ones that they say, oh, well, no, we're getting the truth. But
right.
it's amazing to me that it's only what they're watching. That's the real news or the truth.
Lesson number 10 is believe in truth. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power because there is no basis for which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. The biggest wallet pays for the most blinding lights. You submit to tyranny when you deny the difference between what you want to hear and what is actually true. It's kind of what you were just talking about.
Right.
Very great point. This denial may feel good and natural, but the result is your demise as an individual, and thus the collapse of any political system that depends upon individualism, such as a democratic republic. Victor Klemperer said that truth dies in 4 modes. The first mode is the open hostility to verifiable reality, which takes the form of presenting inventions and lies as if they were facts. In the 2016 campaign for president, it was found that 78% of the claims uttered by candidate Trump as factual were actually false. It is also noted that in his first term as president, he averaged 6 false claims per day in his first year to 39 per day in his final year. The second mode is shamanic incantation, which means, quote, endless repetition, like chants done by shamans chanting to put people in trances. These are designed to make the fictional plausible and the criminal desirable. Think of things like Lion Ted and Crooked Hillary and build the wall and lock her up in the first term. This time around, it has been witch hunt, tremendous, and murderers and the worst of the worst. The third mode is magical thinking, or the open embrace of contradiction. Think about making the economy better, cutting costs, removing immigrants who are the worst of the worst, and what we have actually seen in the first 13 months, the opposite of these.
Yes. I look at gas prices, especially today, right?
Yeah, they jumped another 30 cents overnight.
At a promise of no new wars. And then I see reality and I look at so many different things and question how, if you got on that train and that's the destination you were headed for, are you not sitting in the passenger car and questioning where we're headed? That's just me throwing out a question. So many of the things that we've heard over and over and over, and I'm looking at job reports that are coming out today and the economy and the price of a barrel of oil, or just up the street on the big sign of how much a gallon of gasoline costs. And just in the last week, those numbers have shot up. Grocery prices are not going down.
Exactly.
So we have to compare that. I mean, how do you square hearing one thing and then looking at the total on your grocery bill? I don't get it.
Well, I just noticed when I went out for my drink this morning, a week ago today, here in Logansport, gas at the Speedway was $2.86 a gallon. By Sunday, after the war in Iran, I'm sorry, it's a war, started, it jumped to $3.29 a gallon. This morning, it's $3.59 a gallon. And I looked on my Gas Buddy app, and, that's being reflected in many places, that
right.
Huge jump. And what bothers me most is that the amount of the jump doesn't square with what I've heard economists and gas experts say, based on, I know they said that oil per barrel jumped like $10, but they said, oh, we're probably looking at maybe a 25-cent jump.
Right.
Now we're almost 80 cents in a week.
Right. And with the closure of some of the seaways where a fifth of the oil comes from for the countries that use oil, I would imagine if this war drags on longer than 3, 4, 5 weeks, some people have said that from what we saw earlier this winter, we could be looking at $1 more a gallon for gasoline.
Back to the modes, we're at the fourth mode, which is misplaced faith. This involves self-deifying claims such as, quote, I alone can fix it, or I am your voice, end quote. This is what Orwell referred to as doublethink, or accepting contrary opinions or beliefs at the same time. More recently, it was dubbed, quote, alternative facts, and phrases such as fake news and the most transparent president in history, end quote. Fascists loved slogans, and post-truth is pre-fascism.
Yep. Those slogans are just on loop, right? And you just said, repeat, 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 repeat. And after so many repeats, people repeat.
Yes, and believe, unfortunately.
Yes, right.
Lesson number 11 is investigate. Read more long articles. Figure things out for yourself by researching and investigating. Subscribe to a respected journalism source, or more than one is even better. Understand that a lot of what is on the internet and social media is meant to harm you and your thoughts, and this only gets worse all the time, especially with AI more prevalent. Take responsibility for what you communicate with others. It is your responsibility to determine facts that make you an individual, and our collective trust in common knowledge that makes us a society. The individual who investigates is the citizen who builds. The leader who dislikes the investigators is a potential tyrant. There is a reason we have constantly heard for nearly 10 years now that certain news outlets are, quote, fake news, and why certain news outlets have increasingly been banned from rallies and now from the Pentagon and White House press corps. Like Hitler before him, the current president uses the term, quote, lies to mean statements of fact that he doesn't like. In 1971, in response to lies told in the U.S. about the Vietnam War, political theorist Hannah Arendt took comfort in the essential power of facts to overcome falsehoods in a free society. She said, quote, under normal circumstances, the liar is defeated by reality, for which there is no substitute. No matter how large the tissue of falsehood that an experienced liar has to offer, it will never be large enough, even if he enlists the help of computers to cover the immensity of factuality, end quote. Now, the part about computers in her quote is unfortunately no longer true, but in 1971, she could not have imagined how much computers and the internet would make sorting out facts from lies so difficult by 2026. But it can still be done by carefully choosing the journalistic platforms that you rely on and becoming better at finding facts and statistics on the internet. Remember, you get what you pay for. So if you want reliable journalism where the journalists are qualified and still following journalistic ethics, and I want to point out there, go back to our episode 6 from March of last year if you want to hear what journalistic ethics include. If you want that kind of journalism, you're going to have to pay for it. You wouldn't hire an electrician who provides their service for free, so why should you rely on journalism that is free? Also, look at the journalist's credentials. See if they really are a qualified journalist or just a talking head. And you can Google any one of these people on these quote unquote news programs and see, where they went to school and what kind of degree, if any, they have. I've done some research before on this, and it's amazing. A lot of these people, especially on the quote unquote cable news shows, do not have any kind of journalistic background.
One thing you have to keep in mind, too, is just because they have the word news in the name of their network doesn't mean they're always delivering news. In fact, a lot of, especially in the evenings when the audiences ramp up and we get into prime time, those are cable opinion shows.
Right.
And that's one thing. Another thing is, to prove your point, you say, look at the person who's providing the journalist and look at their background. One thing that immediately pops into my mind is somebody that's now covering news in the Capitol, and it's former Congressman Matt Gaetz, who has zero experience being a journalist, but has a credential and press pass now to get in and bring people news. So that's one example. I did not
know that.
Yes.
That is sad. Lesson number 12 is make eye contact and small talk. This is not just being polite, but also part of being a citizen and a responsible member of society. It is also a way to stay in touch with your surroundings, break down social barriers, and understand whom you should and should not trust. If we enter a culture of accusations, you will want to know the psychological landscape of your daily life. Memoirs of victims of past tyrannical regimes share one insight. They remembered how their neighbors treated them. If they were living in fear, they noticed those who offered a smile, greeting, or handshake, but they remembered also those who looked away or crossed the street to avoid them. They knew who they could trust.
Boy, isn't that the truth? I mean, seriously.
I want to add there too, when I typed this, I didn't think about this, but when I said break down social barriers, think about if somebody's talking to me and they can't look me in the eye,
right? That
bothers me. And right away I'm thinking, okay, what are they lying about?
Right. Or are they not listening or care about what I'm saying? And my opinion that phones, small screens, are two of the biggest culprits in our not being able to communicate with each other, especially in person, because I've watched youth, and especially since the pandemic, and I think they are running behind in their socializing skills because they were isolated. And now they're addicted to their phone screens. And so that eye contact and the camaraderie that we just have and the friendships and socializing and the need to it is normal for humans to want to congregate and talk. And I think that's slipping away from us.
Well, and on top of that, too, one thing I've noticed is, and this has happened to me numerous times, is when you're corresponding with someone via Facebook or text, you can't get the vocalizations. It's hard to...
The tone.
The tone, sometimes it may cause, the way somebody types something might be offensive, but that's not what they mean.
Correct.
So without that, the looking at their face and hearing their tone, it, can cause some real problems.
Okay, and we'll get to 13 in just a few seconds. But first, we're going to ring the bell and have a history lesson. And this is our segment, Bobbi. Don't know much about history.
Don't know much about history.
If 20th century history is a guide, being vice president is the way to go to become president. Of the 18 presidents in the 20th century, 6 were sitting VPs or vice presidents who made the move to the White House. The bad news is that only one actually won the office on their own, and that was George H.W. Bush. He went from vice president under Reagan to running for and being elected president in 1988. 5 others, Teddy Roosevelt, Coolidge, Truman, and Lyndon Johnson, took over upon the death of a president, and Gerald Ford became president after Nixon resigned. 6 men who had been governors eventually ran for and were elected as president. 11 men who became president in the 20th century were former military.
And Gerald Ford is one president that we've had that never really was on the ballot until he tried to run for re-election, right? Like he went into office after Nixon, but he wasn't Nixon's VP.
Right, Agnew was, and he had been forced to resign.
Okay, fun history lesson. All right, Bobbi, I think we're ready for lucky number 13.
So lesson 13 is practice corporeal politics. This means you actually have to physically get involved. Power wants your body softening in your chair and your emotions dissipating on the screen. Get outside. Put your body in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar people. Make new friends and march with them. For resistance to succeed, two boundaries must be crossed. First, ideas about change must engage people of various backgrounds who do not agree on everything. Second, people must find themselves in places that are not their homes and among groups that were not previously their friends. Protest can be organized online, but nothing is real that does not end on the streets. If tyrants feel no consequences for their actions, nothing will change. And I might add, there's another big No Kings protest coming up on March 28th. So get out there among people you don't know and hold your signs up and let these people in our government know how we feel about things.
And I will mention that your voice matters. We just had Secretary of Homeland fired.
All right.
This week as we record this episode. And I would imagine that it's voices from constituents to their congresspeople that fueled that. So your voice does matter, and it does matter. Your presence matters when people are watching on the news and see the number of people who turned out. And if you're feeling slightly shy about going, maybe when you see other people out there on the street standing up and they're the causes you believe in, maybe that will help get you off the couch, because now it's more important for us to participate in government than in my lifetime ever
every
before.
Time one of those No Kings rallies or other ones, or people in Minnesota or California or whatever have gone out in protest, I don't know how many times I've read about or seen people interviewed who said they'd never done anything like that before, but it made them feel so empowered, and they didn't necessarily know or go out with like friends or whatever, or some did, but a lot of them just decided that they had had enough and they wanted to show their solidarity and speak out.
I covered one as a journalist for our news organization, I'm thinking last summer, and I was blown away, really. There were people from about every walk of life that you can imagine here in Indiana, which I think that, when people hear Indiana, they get this certain notion in their head of what we are on the ground here. But I mean, there were young people, there were old people, there were people of different skin colors, there were military people that were in the military, there were retired veterans, people in wheelchairs, all with signs. And it was an inspiration, really, to see all of us come together and collectively in unison say something to our government.
All right. Lesson number 14 is establish a private life. Nastier rulers will use what they know about you to push you around. Scrub your computer of malware on a regular basis. Remember that email, social media, and other online activities are vulnerable to discovery. Consider alternatives to using the internet, such as meeting in person. Resolve any legal troubles, as tyrants often use the legal system as a hook to get you. What political thinker Hannah Arendt meant by totalitarianism was not an all-powerful state, but the erasure of the difference between public and private life. We are free as long as we have control over what people and agencies know about us and how they come to know it. This makes me think about why early in this administration, DOGE, as it was called, was so intent on getting access to our private information that had been guarded by agencies like the Social Security Administration forever. Also, why is this administration hell-bent for states to hand over their voter rolls with our private information?
And I might add, Indiana is one of the states where our governor, Mike Braun, actually handed over our information.
Exactly.
Side point.
Our appetite for the secret, thought Arendt, is dangerously political. Removing the differences between private and public also draws society away from normal policies and toward conspiracy theories. Lesson 15 is contribute to good causes. Be active in organizations, political or not, that express your own view of life. Pick a charity or two to contribute to regularly. Then you will have made a free choice that supports civil society and helps others do good. When Americans think of freedom, we usually imagine a lone individual and a powerful government. We tend to think the individual should be empowered and the government kept at bay. But one element of freedom is the choice of association, and one defense of freedom is the activity of groups to sustain their members. This is why we should participate in activities that are of interest to us, our friends, and our families. The activities do not necessarily have to be political. We know that we take pride in these activities, as do others, and this is us creating civil society. Sharing in an undertaking teaches us that we can trust people beyond a narrow circle of friends and family, and it helps us recognize experts who we can learn from. The ability to trust and learn can make life seem less chaotic and mysterious, and democratic politics more attractive and possible. When we look at anti-communist dissidents of Eastern Europe and today's authoritarian regimes, we see that they highly dislike the idea of free associations and non-governmental associations.
I couldn't help it when you were talking about friends and family. One of the podcasts that we previously have done that talked about how today's Republican Party is not the Republican Party of our grandparents or great grandparents, that it's changed. And it just is always in the back of my head because my family likes to throw out, not all my family, because I have family on both sides of the fence, but the ones that are on the opposite side of the fence always like to say, well, grandpa was a Republican, or we've always been a Republican or a Democrat. We've always, well, that's not the same. And I mean, honestly, I think that if, our great grandparents or grandparents saw what today's Republican and Democrat parties looked like, they might reconsider which party they support. Just food for thought.
And I would, if you haven't, go back a couple of episodes to the one we did on the evolution of our political parties, and that just reinforces what you just said. It's just not the same. They evolve, and they've done that over the course of time a couple of times.
I hope we as a people want to evolve, Bobbi. My goodness, do we not want to evolve? Is that even a thing?
Sadly, though, usually if you think of evolving, you think of it as a positive. In some cases,
we've evolved.
It's negative.
I agree. All right. So number 16.
Lesson 16 is learn from peers in other countries. Keep your friendships overseas or make new friends in other countries. Make sure you have a passport. Present difficulties in the U.S. are part of a larger trend, and no country is going to find a solution by itself. Over the past 10 years, we have heard over and over that the next stage of what was started by candidate and now president, again, Trump, would be stopped in the next stage by one great American institution or another. But to Eastern Europeans and those who have studied Eastern European history, what has happened in the U.S. in the past few years is familiar. Many of the Eastern European experts even thought that Americans were being comically slow to react to the obvious threats of cyber war and fake news initiated by Russia. The Ukrainians had already had this happen to them, but they fought it, and the Russian regime failed to get their preferred leader in the Ukraine, but Russia succeeded in the U.S. in the 2016 election. The fact that most Americans do not have passports has become a problem for American democracy. Many prefer to stay here and defend freedom. They miss the point that this fight will be long and difficult. We must give sustained attention to the world around us, so we know what we are resisting and how best to do it. Having a passport is not surrendering, but it allows for the possibility of new experiences. It is actually liberating. It allows us to see how other people react to similar situations. Much of what has been happening here in the last few years has already happened in other places around the world. So we need to study, observe, and listen.
I know people who have never been out of their home state,
Right.
let alone the country. And fortunately, I've had opportunities to go to other countries and observe, as you were saying, and it does give you some new ideas, things to consider, new perspectives. It lets us look at how we do things here, compare how they do things there. And I would also say if you don't have a passport, now's a great time to get one. And you can't just get them overnight. So
Right.
get the ball rolling.
And I think we may have mentioned this in the part one of this, that I had read for the first time last year. We had more people, citizens, leave, as in not live here anymore and go somewhere else to live. As we had people coming in, we had more people immigrating, as in EMI, rather than immigrating IMMI. So
wow. So we had a net loss.
Yes. Lesson 17 is listen for dangerous words. Be alert for the words extremism and terrorism. Be aware of the fatal notions of the words emergency and exception. Be angry about the treacherous use of patriotic vocabulary. The Nazi regime made extensive use of the idea of exceptionalism. This is the way they destroyed democracy. They claimed the present moment was exceptional, and it was necessary to transform that state of exception into an emergency. The citizens traded real freedom for fake safety. People who assure you that you can only gain security at the price of liberty usually want to deny you both. It is the government's job to increase both freedom and security. Remember, a long time ago, we talked about for the common good.
Yes.
And the purpose of our government. So just a reminder, extremism sounds bad, and governments often try to make it sound worse by adding the word terrorism in the same breath. The word extremism has little meaning, and it is not a doctrine. When tyrants use the term, they mean people not in the mainstream, which they are defining in that moment. Resistors in the 20th century, whether they were against communism or fascism, and modern authoritarian regimes like Russia, have been referred to by the leaders of those regimes as extremists. In reality, they are just critics of these regimes, and authoritarian regimes do not like their policies to be criticized. So extremism comes to mean everything except what is, in fact, extreme, and that is tyranny. And this just reminds me a couple things here. How many times have we heard this administration say, we're the greatest, America's great, we're return of a golden age.
It's the golden age.
Yes, and all those things. And the second thing is that last part that I mentioned, the far left, how is it that he often says it, the far left radicals, which radical is another word
Right.
for extreme, because many of them are critics of this administration. So, any critic, you're obviously automatically a far left extremist, whether you really are or not.
Right. That's just crazy, too, because we do have freedom of speech here, and we are allowed to criticize our leaders, our politicians. And
Well, we're supposed to have that.
Well, fair. All the way from local on up to federal. And it just seems like some folks have gotten such a thin skin that they come back with a nuclear response when an innocent critique is made on what they're doing, or anybody questions what they are doing. They come back, just full blaze. And it's been interesting to watch some of the hearings that have gone on in the Senate, in some of the oversight committees, because when it comes right down to some of the things that have been told to us as Americans in the United States, it's interesting to watch when they are asked under oath how they respond, and if they're even given an answer that has anything to do with the question.
And especially when there's like video and or audio to back up what they said a week or 2 weeks or a month ago or whatever, and they're trying to say, well, that wasn't what I said. Well,
here it is.
Yeah, it was.
And the thing right now, Bobbi, that I'm just amazed with watching is no, we have not had an official declaration of war for Iran, but I cannot name how many people in leadership positions up to and including the president use the word war.
Exactly.
And then when you say the word war, they look you right in the eyeball and say, well, this isn't a war.
Right.
Well,
no war's been declared.
Which is it? Is it a war or is it not a war? And if it's not a war, then you quit calling it a war.
Good point. Lesson 18 is be calm when the unthinkable arrives. Modern tyranny is terror management. When the terrorist attack comes, that is when the authoritarian exploits the event to consolidate power. The sudden disaster requires the end of checks and balances, the dissolution of political parties, the suspension of freedom of expression, the right to a fair trial, and so on. The oldest trick in the Hitlerian playbook. Do not fall for it. In 1933 Germany, it was the Reichstag fire, the building that housed the German parliament. As it burned and he watched, Hitler said, quote, "This fire is just the beginning," end quote. The next day, a decree suspended the rights of all German people, allowing them to be, quote, "preventively detained," end quote, by the police. Hitler claimed the fire to be the work of Germany's enemies. Police and Nazi paramilitaries started rounding up left-wing political parties and placing them in prison camps. Next, the new German parliament passed an, quote, "enabling act," end quote, allowing Hitler to rule by decree. Germany remained in this state of emergency for the next 12 years until the end of World War II. Hitler used an act of terror, an event of limited significance, to institute a reign of terror and a world war that killed millions and changed the world. Get the book on tyranny and read about how Putin has used similar decrees and actions in modern-day Russia. When this American president and his national security advisor spoke of fighting terrorism alongside Russia, what they were proposing was terror management, or the exploitation of real, dubious, and simulated terror attacks to bring down democracy. This occurred in the first Trump presidency. For tyrants, the lesson of the Reichstag fire is that one moment of shock enables an eternity of submission. For us, the lesson must be that our natural fear and grief must not enable the destruction of our institutions. Courage means recognizing and resisting terror management now, when it seems the most difficult. We can't take time to be afraid and grieve first. James Madison made the point that tyranny arises, quote, "on some favorable emergency," end quote. I'm just thinking, what is the event? Is this war, quote unquote, war with Iran, the event here? I mean, what?
I have questions because not long ago we said that we completely destroyed their nuclear capabilities. And now in this last week, I'm hearing there was a threat against this land. And
Right.
again, I question as a journalist, which one is it? And maybe two things can be true at the same time, but which one is it?
Right.
And you bring up courage, Bobbi, and there's some deadlines coming up for our courage.
Right.
And those deadlines involve making sure you are registered to vote. And you need to double check, especially if you've moved or gotten married or divorced or anything has changed in your life. I think one of the most courageous things we will do in 2026 is go to the ballot box.
And I'm thinking, I'd already thought about this, our next episode, I think we may cover, especially with changes that did and didn't happen in Indiana, for example, I think we're going to talk about voting and some
Perfect.
deadlines and things that have to do with voting, since we are now in the primary season.
We're in the season. Political
Yes,
signs
yes.
start going out Saturday.
Lesson 19 is be a patriot. Set a good example of what America means for future generations. They need it now. What is patriotism? Let's first discuss what it is not. It is not dodging the draft and mocking war heroes. It is not avoiding paying one's share of taxes. It is not patriotic to ask for campaign donations and then use them for your own companies. It is not patriotic to admire foreign dictators or to forge friendly relationships with them. It is not patriotic to ask Russia to interfere in our elections or to ask a state to find 11,780 votes that were not cast for you. The point is not that Russia and America must be enemies, but that patriotism involves serving your own country. It is not patriotic to get richer off of the presidency. I could go on and on. This president is a nationalist, which is not the same as being a patriot. A nationalist encourages us to be our worst and then tells us that we are the best. Orwell said a nationalist, quote, although endlessly brooding on power, victory, defeat, revenge, tends to be uninterested in what happens in the real world, end quote. Conversely, a patriot wants the nation to live up to its ideals, which means asking us to be our best selves. A patriot must be concerned with the real world, which is the only place where his country can be loved and sustained. A patriot has universal values, standards by which he judges his nation, always wishing it well and wishing that it would do better. Democracy failed in Europe in the first half of the 20th century, and it is failing in parts of the world today. A nationalist will say that, quote, it can't happen here, end quote, which is the first step toward disaster. But a patriot says that it can happen here, but that we will stop it. Lesson 20 is be as courageous as you can. If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. We cannot and must not forget history's lessons. To do so would be catastrophic. History instructs. That is why our founders used their knowledge of what had and had not worked in past governments when creating our government. The one that they created has lasted for just shy of 250 years. We must decide if we want it to last 250 more.
I'd like to go ahead and register my vote now and lock it in if I could. I would like it to last another 250 years.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I hear the bell, and Bobbi, it is time for another pop quiz.
Bueller.
Last episode's question is, what does the president's cabinet do? And if you said something like they advise the president, that's basically it. Obviously, presidents can't know everything about everything, especially in our large country. So that's why they have all those different cabinet departments to help them. This episode's question from the U.S. naturalization test is, who vetoes bills?
All right. And you're talking about at the federal level.
Exactly.
So it sounds like maybe next episode we may be headed towards some voter education and talking about some deadlines. But keep in mind that we try to stay nimble and we try to respond. And if something comes up, we will shift gears and try to address that topic. And Bobbi, with that said, and the fact that we currently are at war, I just want to make it abundantly clear for me that our men and women in uniform deserve our respect. They volunteer to go where the nation sends them, whether or not they agree with the mission. They volunteer and they go. They leave their families, and I know that's super hard on their families. They risk their lives and carry the weight of decisions made by civilian leaders. Supporting the troops means honoring their service, caring for them when they come home, and making sure we never treat their sacrifice lightly. We've lost 6 lives already, right. 6 American lives. It also means holding our leaders accountable for how and when they send Americans into harm's way. Respect for the military and responsibility from our leaders must go hand in hand. So God bless America today, and God protect and bless our American troops. Bobbi, thank you for this. It's been, again, one of my favorite episodes so far. And I know that book, again, on tyranny, Timothy Snyder.
Dr. Timothy Snyder, yes.
Go find that in a bookstore today.
If you're not, I would follow him on Instagram. He does, along with Dr. Heather Cox Richardson, who has longer, hers are like 15 minutes a day. He's been putting little short, couple-minute videos on Instagram based on what goes on every day. And his main emphasis of study over the last 30 or 40 years has been regime changes and what's going on in Eastern Europe and Europe in general and different places. So that's his area of expertise, is to recognize authoritarian rule.
And if you want another book that's sort of like this vintage throwback read you've mentioned in this episode, 1984, it's on my bookshelf in my library. And I think that would be another timely read if you're looking to start a book club. That would be a good one to read right now and compare to what's happening in the world.
And then, like I said earlier in this episode, there are a lot of them out there. If you're not sure titles, just Google it. We have it at our fingertips. Information, right there.
Something I would encourage folks to do is go onto our social media Facebook page. Plain Civics is all you have to Google, and start a conversation on there. If you know a good book that you've read that you really think applies today, Bobbi has thrown out a couple. I just threw out one. But if you know some books that you've read and you think, oh my goodness, this is like looking in a mirror right now, throw them out there on our Facebook page. We'd love to get the conversation going. We'd love to get you engaged. Or if you want to email us so you don't have to show your name online, you can do that too. It's plaincivicspodcast@gmail.com. Plain Civics Podcast, no uppercase, no space, none of that. Just Plain Civics Podcast@gmail.com. Bobbi, thank you as always for being the teacher.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
For having a good conversation.
And that's it for this episode of Plain Civics, breaking down the basics, no politics, just facts. Thank you for listening today. And until next episode, stay informed and stay engaged.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.